Welcome back to another episode of Shift with Elena. In this conversation, I sit down with Jonathan Shroyer. He's the CEO and founder of Quimby to explore the future of customer experience powered by AI and large language models. Jonathan shares his unique story from growing up in rural Texas with a passion for technology through pivotal roles at major companies like Microsoft and Postmates to founding innovating startups focused on transforming customer experience. So if you're interested in the intersection of technology, customer experience, and business innovation, this episode is definitely for you. He really shares a lot of interesting insights, practical examples, and thoughtful advice for leaders, HR professionals, and builders everywhere. As always, please like, subscribe, and share, and come back for more. Jonathan, welcome to the Shift Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me, Elena. I appreciate it.
Yeah, super excited to dive into all the different things that you've been building and creating, and the teams and Quimby, and the amazing work that you guys are doing in terms of customer experience and really just creating these experiences for people. But before we get into that, tell me a little bit more about, share with my audience your backstory. Like, why should they stick around? What is so interesting about your career that they're like, this is interesting. I actually want to stick around and listen to this.
Well, for me, it's interesting. Hopefully, it's interesting for the listeners too. I lived, kind of out in the backwoods of Texas, out in the country, and I was a different type of kid. I have autism, and so I was a different type of kid. And I really gravitated towards technology and helping people. It was always kind of my thing. So I was always the first kid that had like the 386 computer, the first kid that had the consoles and all these different types of things. I was back when Apple II was doing like where in the world is Carmen Sandiego, I was doing that. So I was like really interested in it. And so naturally, because I was interested in it, then people asked me lots of questions as things, kind of move forward in my life. And then I started to help people. And I got a lot of meaning out of just helping people with technology because it was a natural interest for me and something that I excelled at. And so kind of fast forward to my career, I was at university going to college, needed some money. And so I thought, well, I'll just get a job to support customers with Microsoft 95. So that might age me a little bit. And then, Excel 97. And then I started to kind of really get this interest in like, how do you create value with customers? Like, how do you help them? And then as
Mhm.
I learned a little bit more about business, 25 years later, right? Learned a little bit more about business. I had various different experiences, but it's always been about how do you create value or how are you a 10x value creator for your client, whether it's, a boss when I worked for Microsoft, whether it's a founder when I worked for Postmates, or whether it's when I run my own companies and my own clients and customers. How do I create that 10x value and help their end users want to stay with them, retain them, and obviously deliver more revenue and monetization and a great experience. So that's kind of a little bit about me, and maybe that's
Yeah.
interesting. Hopefully it's interesting for folks. It's interesting to me for sure.
Yeah, it's always interesting. That's why I love to ask this question, because I think everybody's story is unique. Everybody has some interesting thing that they had in their life that they got to where they are today. And for you, it's been building companies, building teams. And I think that's important to
Yeah.
note because, in the world where we're so pushed towards like one way to achieve something, I think it's always interesting to see how people actually started. Like, where did people get interest? Like, how did that path, I guess, unraveled as you kind
Yeah.
of grew through your career? So so I always say, like, I think it's statistical, like over 50 or 60 people who graduate college end up doing something completely different from
Oh yeah. Yeah.
what they actually studied. And I think that's one of the biggest questions I get from like some of the clients I work with is like they're not sure what to do, or if they do, they don't know how to get there. And it's like, I think through these kind of stories is people understand there's no one way. You just kind of
Yeah.
follow through certain pathways, and for some people it's smooth, for some people it's not, but nonetheless everybody's unique. I have to pick on customer service in general. I don't know what has happened over the last, I don't know, 5, 10 years, Jonathan, but customer service in general just has gone down the drain, or maybe that's just my perception. And
Yeah.
so from your perspective, how has this kind of customer experience, customer expectations evolved? And like, what have you seen being in this space? Like, how, like, is it something that differentiates companies these days? Is it something that like we should
Yeah.
care about?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because so back in the 90s when I started, it was email kind of hadn't caught on yet. So all customer service was phone, right? Super engaging. Every company knew that if they wanted to keep customers and help customers, they had to have a phone line that was open. And so customers would call in, and if you are a high caliber company that focused on customer service, you kind of answered your phone in 2 minutes, right? And as that kind of expanded and grew, and companies, especially with the dot-com bubble, exploded, they realized that it's really expensive to do phone support in the US. And so then you had this massive transformation where everybody moved phone support off to India, the Philippines, or other low-cost labor markets. And then kind of email support started to come in right in the early 2000s. And so then they started to see, like, can we parlay customers off of phone to email because email is a little cheaper? And there's a variety of different things that happened kind of between 98 and 2010. But I like to refer to that, like, that decade or 12 years, as the economy decade for customer service, because everyone's trying to figure out, how do I save money so I don't spend as much money on customer service, right? That was kind of
Mhm.
what happened. And that was the foundation of some of the problematic trends that you're looking at today. So, and then you hit kind of the 2010s to I'd say 2020 almost. And you started off where customers are starting to realize, hey, if I want to keep customers, I actually have to talk to them, treat them with respect, figure out what their problems are, and figure out how to understand their experience better. So you had some companies, like the Zappos of the world, and those types of companies that really leaned into it and had an enormous amount of success. And so by the time we got to the end of 2020, by then, you had chat support, you had email, you had, simplified AI bots, you still have phone support. Communities started to take, over 2010 to 2020, communities, to some extent, influencers started to become an education platform, for different products and so forth. And then you kind of lean in, COVID kind of happened, and everything was just like super challenging for everybody
Yeah.
during COVID. But it was harder for companies to engage with, their customers face to face. So then they said, well, how can we invest in the customer experience, right? And so for a couple of years there, a lot of companies were really caring about the customer experience and driving it. And then what we found kind of post COVID is some companies have fall back into their bad behaviors of, hey, it's a cost center, it's not a profit center. And then you have maybe 10 or 15% of the brands that say, hey, it's a profit center. Like, how do I deliver an experience that makes it where the customer feels like it's fully customized, fully engaging, and it's all about them? And it becomes a profit center because I end up loving the brand because the service is so great. So I keep coming back to the brand. And then at the same time, over the past couple of years, also the LLM models have come into play. Some companies have used them, in my opinion, a little bit less effectively for the customer because they've turned it into a deflection mechanism. Whereas instead of using it as an agent assist mechanism to make your agent a superhero and give them the ability to be 6x more productive and deliver customized experiences, And so I think that as it's matured, what continues to happen in America, which isn't always the case in other countries, especially when I lived in Europe and when I lived in Asia, is that there tends to be a very capitalistic culture in America. And so everything's about, how do I drive shareholder value? How do I drive shareholder value? And what tends to happen is dev, design, art, product tends to get all the focus, and people don't always focus on customer experience and customer service,
Mm.
which they should do, but they don't. So that's my synopsis on the
Mm.
situation.
Yeah, that's really thorough. Actually, it's some things I never even thought about in terms of just the timeline. So, and yeah, I agree. I think like we were chatting before we hopped on. Like, I think every country does it differently when it comes to the customer experience. And I think with large language models, or LLMs, for people who don't know what LLMs are, but I think it is one of those things where it's getting better. But I remember just like not too long ago when the chat bots, I mean, just kill me now if I have to talk to one, right?
Yeah.
And now it's like gotten so much better. But still, like, whenever I have a chance to engage with a human being, like, listen, if a chatbot or whatever, like, if technology can solve a problem, yes, but most of the time it doesn't, right? Especially if it's so, to have that option, I think, is super important. So to your point, like, companies are kind of, those that are doing it well maybe are finding that, middle ground. But then if you have a human being on the other side, then you have to make sure you're taking care of that employee so that they
Yeah.
deliver the great customer service. So what have you seen? Have you seen like a trend in that, or what have you seen from the back end?
Well, So I have like a very firm opinion on the use of LLMs. And so like when I think about L&D, when I think about growing employees and helping them, be successful, my firm opinion isn't that LLMs will replace humans. Of course, there's going to be some replacement. There's nothing I can do about that. But when you look at what can they really do, well, they can become a superpower for every human that leverages it if they know how to use it, if they're trained,
Mm,
the culture is set up appropriately, if they have the tools and the technology that make it seamless and easy, and the UX is seamless and easy for the human to use. So imagine you're like a customer service employee, right? So 10 years ago, customer service employee would go to work, they get trained for 3 or 4 weeks in the beginning of their job. Then they, put on the phones, email and say, hey, go figure it out. Every 2 weeks, we'll update the knowledge base. If there's a launch, we'll do a training. Uh, but there's an FAQ, and then you've got your buddy next door if you have any questions. I mean, that was pretty much what it was, right? Which
mhm,
doesn't really set up the customer service employee for a lot of success. It sets them up for a lot of potential errors. And so now you fast forward to, like whether you use Quimby, like our tool or other tools, now you fast forward to where right now, in gaming, you have to go to 6 or 7 different places as a customer service employee to get the answer for the customer. But what Quimby does is it takes all of that information sources and it puts it all into one location for the agent, and then it helps write a customized response for the agent to reply back to the player. So it takes all of that data source, all of that work, all of the most modern information, puts it right there in front of the player or in front of the agent for the player. So then it helps. I like to call it like the agent becomes the architect of the customer experience as opposed to the typist. Right.
mm,
And if you can architect and really think thoughtfully about, okay, what's this player going through? What's the challenge? How can I help them? And what tools do I have? Then your ability to feel more purposeful, more valued, and deliver something more interesting for the company just grows exponentially, right? So I think
mm,
that's why my opinion on whether you call it agent assist, whether you call it co-pilot, I like to call it the architect experience, whatever you call it, it empowers that customer service person to be able to do things faster, 6x faster, because you have the LLM doing a lot of the work, but then they can solve bigger, more challenging and more interesting problems that keeps them retained in the
mhm.
position job because they get more value out of the job.
Right, and they feel like they're actually doing something
That's
productive. They're
right.
not just getting yelled at by the by the customer because they're not
That's
able to
right.
solve
That's
the
right.
the problem
Exactly.
fast
Exactly.
enough.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely on board with using AI as a partner. That's kind of how with our startup with Shiftwell, we call them like a partner, like partner with AI, like educate your staff
Yeah.
around partnering, like treat it as a partner. I also agree. I don't think it's going to replace. I think human touch is always gonna, not always, but I think for the near future, we'll still want that human touch until the generations die out, and maybe there'll be, just like in that movie, Her.
Yeah. Yeah.
The movie Her.
Oh
You've
yeah.
seen it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so like maybe once we get to that point, but I still think there's gonna be that human necessity. So let me ask you about Quimby because so I want to know like why did you go into gaming? First of all, I know nothing about gaming. So tell me a little bit more about the gaming industry and how do you guys work with your clients there from a customer service perspective?
Yeah, so gaming is super interesting. So I had a startup that I did previously called Officium Labs, and it was all gaming focused as well. And it was about the ability to use engagement, to use benchmarks that we had created, a service stack, and so to use people, process, and technology to help companies retain their players longer through the customer service engagement, right? And so we didn't have LLM models back then. We had Python, which was kind of rudimentary at the time. But we still were able to help companies increase their overall LTV, the lifetime value, with their players by about 10 to 15%, which with some companies it was millions of dollars, right? And so the idea here is that if you engage players where they are in a customized way, give them what they need to be successful in the game that they're choosing to play, choosing to love, then they're probably going to play more. That was the hypothesis, and it proved out to be true. So when we launched Quimby, what we wanted to do, that Officium was a heavy services type of company, which is great, but we wanted to create a product that all of these gaming companies that could use that was kind of rooted in that same kind of philosophy and hypothesis, but then fast forwarded and innovated into what LLMs can do. And so what Quimby does is essentially it integrates as an engagement layer on top of your CRM, on top of your game database, your game, your FAQ, and it creates a one-stop location for your agent where they can see all the player information. Externally, they can see what's talking about on Reddit about this issue. They can see, the latest updates, bugs in the game, so they know
Mm.
that. And then the question that comes in from the player via the CRM, and then the AI, whether we use cloud in some cases, GPT in other cases, but the AI then looks at all of this information on the back end and writes the first fully customized, hyper personalized response. And then it also has the ability to recommend compensation, recommend incentives, recommend things that they could do in the game to get past the wall that they're in, identifies
Mm.
fraud. So it does all these different tools for the player. And so that in itself, you get back to the player faster. You help the agent be 6x more productive and work on more interesting and purposeful thing. And because you're making it fully customized and giving them the just-in-time right compensation or incentive that they need, then you're able to drive LTV for the player. And the reason we chose gaming is this will really work in any digital marketplace, but gaming is a heavily digital marketplace where you can easily do micro A/B testing to identify what works and what doesn't work within a day or two. Like you get so
Mm.
much data in gaming, and so it's so fast, so much faster to train the AI and get the AI to deliver the value. But it could work in e-commerce, it could work in hospitality, it could work in pretty much any industry that is heavily digitally commerced.
And that's the reason it works is because so many people playing games, and it's such
That's right.
a and for so many hours, right?
That's right. That's right.
That's interesting. What's a question like? What's a I really I genuinely don't know. Like, what's a customer service? Okay, you're playing a game. What are some of the typical questions that people have when it comes like that they would interact with AI for?
So some of the basic ones that they get might be like, "Hey, I bought this offer, but I didn't get my resources," or something.
Okay,
Another one might be, "Hey, I was doing this map and there was a glitch in the game, and I need to I
gotcha.
want to say it." But more complex ones would be like, "Hey, I'm on Marvel Contest of Champions Max 6. I'm in Pathway 1. I'm trying to figure out how to beat Rogue. Like, how do I do that? I can't figure out how to do that." Like that's a more complex, nuanced one that a human can't easily do on their own today. Because first of all, not every agent will be on path 6 or map 6, path 1, but the AI will have game tested it all out and be able to provide, hey, these are the heroes
Mm.
I would use. These are the premium buffs that I would use. This is what I would do if you wanted to be this. So there's like the complex ones, and then there's the like the simple ones. The simple ones are fairly easy to solve with even basic AI, but the complex ones are where you need really intense LLM trained models to do it.
Mm. And yeah, I mean, I can see how this is useful in so many places because I'm just as you're talking in terms of like lifetime and retention in general of customers. We need something so fast and we need it now that if you're not getting those answers, or God forbid you have to wait on the phone or try to get an answer, you're just done, and that's it. Like it's just
Yeah,
too
yeah,
painful, and it's too painful.
yeah,
So that's a real thing. And yeah, we just don't have patience anymore in that sense, and maybe we shouldn't. Like there's more important things to do than to be on a phone with a customer service. Right, so yeah.
yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's when you think about the eyeball game, it's like it. So if you're a gaming publisher, it's like if they're not playing my game, they're watching Netflix, they're perusing Facebook. So gaming competitors aren't necessarily other gaming publishers. They're
Yeah.
other real-time entertainment mechanisms. And so it's been proven time after time, if a gamer has to leave the game, then they go and do something else and they get distracted and then they're not coming back to the game for a long time. So if your focus as a gaming publisher is to keep people playing the game and engaged and immersed in this beautiful universe that you've created for them, you have to make it possible for them never to leave the game.
Yeah. Oh gosh, it's yes, it's like you're just fighting for attention.
Yeah.
You're fighting because if it's not, like you said, it's Netflix, it's something else. The good old days where it used to be a book, Jonathan, but now It's you're fighting for other electronics, and yeah, I didn't
Yeah.
even think about that. That you're not even fighting for other gamers. Is there like a component of nudging? Like, does your tool do like nudging? Like, let's say
Yeah.
somebody does leave the game,
Yeah.
like you're like, hey, come back.
Yes. That's
Different
a,
words,
yeah.
but
Yeah, we do. So we have the ability to send notifications via the game, looking at, when the last time they played were, where they were on the map, whether we nudge them and just remind them, or whether we nudge them with an incentive or nudge them with an offer. So we have all of that capability, and we can also look at the history of like where what's the likelihood that someone turns off their notifications if you nudge too much? So what's the right time and the right amount to nudge them? Maybe over the last 12 days they played their game between 5 and 7 p.m. So you're not going to nudge them at 3 p.m. because they're going to get annoyed. But if you nudge
mm,
them between 5 and 7 p.m., the likelihood of them like going in and doing something is much higher. So you really have to, and that's where AI comes in as well. Humans being able to analyze that is not as efficient. And so having an AI compile all that information, analyze it, and then provide the automated nudges pre-written by AI, then you're able to get those players back to playing the game and then monetizing and so forth.
yeah. No, that's super interesting. I mean, great for gaming companies, right? Like, because I mean, that's the beauty about AI is that you can apply it in it can be scalable. You can do it cheaper, right? And so on. And and you replace essentially employees, or your employees are using the AI as a partner, as we talked about earlier. Why did you name it Quimby? What does it mean? Does it mean anything?
So Quimby, in the broadest sense, it means helper enabler. And so the idea behind it is that we're a helper and an enabler for whatever clients that we work with to help them with their customers in whichever way that they want to help them have that authentic, meaningful experience. And so that's kind of the meaning behind it.
Okay. Nice. I didn't know what Quimby meant, so now I know.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so what would be the next industry that you like that's like your dream industry after gaming? Or like the
So I
next
think
two?
I think e-commerce and hospitality are natural fits because, like you talked about the nudging. So abandoned cart nudging, right, with e-commerce, about browse abandoned nudging, with hospitality. Oh, you were looking at these, hotels. If you want a 10% discount, come and book. So there's some natural nudging capabilities there, but then because they have the digital marketplace in place for those two industries, then they have a treasure trove of information that can create that hyper personalized experience at scale for their millions and millions of customers. So those are the two natural ones. Fantasy sports is another one. Real money gaming, those types of things. Those all kind of fall under the gaming umbrella.
Yeah. Interesting. With I guess the increase in AI and innovation and so on, what are some things you're losing sleep over when it comes to your product? Or what are you looking at as next, like as an enhancement to your product with just the amount of stuff that's out there?
I think what's most important is whenever we roll something out new with the product, we focus on a simple principle. Is it noise or is it signal? And that's what it means is like, is it going to provide signal for the client to be more effective and to get more towards their goals, their values, their outputs, their outcomes? Or is it going to be noise? Like, oh, there's a lot of bunch of features. Like, back it used to be conversation of feature rich versus feature relevant, right? And so we're a very feature relevant type of company. And so when we think about those features, it's like, how can we provide better signal, more signal, improve
Mm,
signal? And so some of the features, that we're working on right now are taking the LLM models and identifying after the training how to create better signal and better analytics. So the first super agent, which is the one I talked about, is super agent engage. The next one is super agent insights. And so basically, we're going to make it possible for anybody in any company, but in this particular starting point, gaming studios, to be their own junior BI analyst. So if you're in a company today, you submit a analytics request, and 2 weeks later you get a report, MyBI or Looker or something. But now imagine that all that's plugged into the back end of our super agent, and any person across the entire studio can ask the super agent questions and get the answers that they need. Now, if they want a robust, a formal report, one that the CEO would want to see, sure, go through the BI team for sure. But if you're trying to understand how to quickly get to data to help you do your job better on a day-to-day basis, then our super agents insights will be a key thing. And we think
Mm,
that's a feature relevant capability that a lot of people, it's not their skill set. Analytics isn't everybody's bailiwick, right? And
mm-hmm.
so helping people with that as a superpower, since it's not their strength, and let them focus on what they're really good at, I think is something that we're excited about.
Yeah, I think just having that reporting and data analytics will be super
Yeah.
interesting, super
Yeah.
valuable. Yeah, I mean that's like just to understand trends and stuff of users. I'm curious, how big is your team now?
So we have a small team, about 5 people.
Okay, that's
So
amazing.
we started in May. September now we have 2 customers. We're close to profitability, and we've got about 3 or 4 customers in the pipeline that we're bringing on soon. And so it's kind of just the right time. In 5 years, this wouldn't be an interesting product. It would be just like table stakes. But right now, it's just the right time to start to get in there, deliver value, make a difference, and help companies as they're trying to figure out this AI revolution. But help them because they say 95% of AI projects fail. And I think what we're trying to do is help everybody get into that 5% bucket of success by making whatever we do relevant and applicable so it can bring immediate value back to the business so then the project doesn't fail.
Mm. And so, over your career of kind of just building products and teams, like, first of all, what sparked you? It sounds like you were kind of a creator and builder from a young age, but at what point, you're like, this is actually what I want to do? Because you've built a few things. So, like,
Yeah.
are you just like, you enjoy the building part, you enjoy the scaling part? Like, what drove you to that?
Well, it's interesting. So when I kind of graduated college and went into the workforce, I grew up in a fairly poor family. And so for me, security like was of the utmost priority. And so I joined all these big companies that were more secure. And I learned an enormous amount of things, like cut my teeth at Microsoft, Autodesk, Symantec, and so forth. But at some point, my wife, she's a very good mentor for me. She was like, "Hey, I've seen that you work for like these 4 big, companies, and eventually you get bored, you get frustrated, because of the system, because of the structure, and you just want to like do something, but then you're like blocked." She's like, "How? Why don't you just go do a startup?" And because a startup is
Mm,
more flexible, more nimble. And so I was always trying to build and scale inside these big enterprises, but I would always get hit with these barriers, and it would be super frustrating for me. And so then finally, I went into Postmates, which is an amazing startup to start with. It was like growing 10% per week when I joined. So I learned it. I learned a ton, and then I did my own startup, and now my second and third one. But what I learned about myself, and I think this is an important thing for like HR professionals to know when they're coaching their employees, is each employee has to learn like what is it. I think 3 things. What is it that makes me different? Something that I do that nobody else can do. I think the second thing is what is it that I enjoy? Like I get a lot of passion and excitement out of it. And third, what is it that can be applicable to the business? And if you can find something that is kind of across all three, I would encourage HR professionals to say, ask their employees that question, you
mm,
know, because so what I found about myself was building and scaling and learning are like the 3 most important things to my personality, my ethos, my spirit, whatever you want to call it, right? Those are the things that are the most important to me. And so I try to put myself in positions where I'm building, scaling, and learning. And if I'm not building, scaling, and learning, then it's time for me to sell or it's
mm,
time for me to exit or whatever the
right.
case might
Yeah.
be. And so, but that's for me, right? But that's kind of the most important thing because I get a lot of thrill of solving problems. Like I bought this e-commerce company, 18 months ago. They were doing 2 million a year, right? And I was like, hey, I think we can get this company up to like $30 million a year. But I knew nothing about e-commerce at the time. And so I just bought it. I learned a ton, made some mistakes, had some successes, and now the company will deliver like 11 million revenue this year. So we grew quite a bit really fast, and so we're on the track to 30. But what was most interesting to me was like all the problems along the way. And I was like, how do I solve this? Okay, I haven't solved this problem yet. Okay, I have to think about this differently. Okay, how do I solve? Okay, I haven't solved it yet. Let me think about it. So it's this kind of iterative learning process, which sometimes can be expensive, financially,
Yeah.
and physically and mentally.
Right.
But I like and so there's been some problems that I've finally solved in the e-commerce space, and it's like now our company's profitable and scaling and profitable. It's great. But like I have that builder scaler mentality. Is like I want to go in and jump into the deep end of the pool and figure it out, and I will figure it out. But I gotta have enough time and capital to do it.
Yeah, no, it's yeah. I was just speaking like I can totally relate. I'm not quite there yet, in building as many things as you have, but I do enjoy that process, the sexual
Yeah,
process, and I think a lot of people do. It's just like I find it surprising how many people struggle to answer that questions like, what is it that I uniquely do? I mean, I recently just feel like I'm just starting to figure out what is it that I uniquely do that
yeah,
no, but that makes me different. And I mean, know how different, maybe not too different anyway, but it works for me. And I think that's the hard question for a lot of people
yeah,
to answer. And then furthermore, if we talk from an HR or like learning and development perspective, that's like the hardest thing is how do you actually get that intrinsic motivation, the values, the actual, what is it actually people want to get out of their careers? Because a lot of people, Jonathan, don't know. They really
yeah,
don't know, but I think once you figure that out, then you're in a position where you're like, I know exactly what I can be doing. And, in this case, building and scaling and creating. And I think naturally we all want to like build and create. I think it's just innate in
yeah.
us, I would imagine, right?
I think so. And I think, for the audience, it's like I'm 47 to be clear. So when I was 30, I did not have this question answered.
Yeah.
When I was
Fair.
25, I did not have this question answered. So don't feel like you have to have this question
Yeah.
answered. But at least if you're asking yourself the question, eventually over time, you will learn the answer. And be
Yeah.
patient. This isn't like a video game or a TV show. Like you have to be patient. You have to, as my 4-year-old son said the other day, Papa, I do not like this waiting. I would prefer not to do the waiting. And I was like, yeah, I think none of us like to do the waiting, Bubba. But anyway, so sometimes we have to wait and we have to like have more experiences to figure out the answer. And that would be some advice I give to folks. It's not an immediate thing.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you calling that out, and it's also important to have those experiences and not be stuck in like actually experimenting. Like nothing
Yeah,
happens if time will pass unless you're experimenting and trying new things. Like it's very hard to figure things out otherwise. And like
yeah,
kind of what you were saying, sometimes it's expensive mistakes, expensive learnings, but it's just part of the process. And somebody said to me a long time ago, said it's a process, and process takes time. And I think
it's
that's how
true.
I face like everything. It's a process, and a process takes time, and it's
It's
just what
true.
it is. No, that's very, very cool. So as you're kind of looking for the next year, so you're looking at potentially e-commerce and gaining more clients, like what else are you excited for next year?
I think for me, I think it's going to be fun to see how the different industries figure out how to leverage AI in meaningful ways and interesting ways that help the people, because people built the company, right? Help the people, but then also help their business grow and thrive. I mean, case in point, like with Quimby, what we built our MVP product in about 20% of the cost that it would have been 5 years ago, right? And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of that had to do with like, hey, it was still a human driving it, architecting it, but we were able to use LLMs to do all the development and the design and all that stuff, right? So there are going to be some unique, interesting opportunities in a lot of different industries to figure out how AI can help their people, how AI can help their business. And I think there's a lot of fun, exciting things that will be out there in that space. But I also think that it'll be super interesting to see what are the use cases that we find where we shouldn't use AI or we should protect people from, or we should set up processes to ensure that we're protecting our customers, whether it's privacy or other things, right? So we'll start to, wander into this world, this wild, wild west of AI, which is where I think it still is. and then eventually we'll start to put the right guardrails in place so everyone can be treated fairly, inclusively, successfully, and all that kind of stuff. But the third thing that really gets me excited about AI, and I don't know that a lot of people think about it this way, maybe they do, is that today, if you look at like the media marketing that's happened over the last 20, 30 years of my life, it's all been focused on a general certain demographic. And that's because it's really expensive to build media marketing and market. And so then customer or clients, when they want to acquire customers, they acquire customers from the demographic that they think will make the most likely to purchase, right? Which tends to leave out a lot of demographics. And so I think what AI can do is it can help companies scale their media marketing and scale their user acquisition in a way that they can go after all the demographics, and it can be more inclusive to all the different buying demographies that are out there. And I'm really excited to see like how that matures. It's not my space, but it's one that I'm
Mm-hmm.
watching, right? I'm really interested to see how that matures, and I know in my e-commerce business that I have, we attempt to do some of these things because, the general, it's a quilting business, it's like crafts and quilting. So
Mm-hmm.
there's an old demographic that, buys most in the industry, but then there's a lot of other demographics out there that don't get marketed to, so they don't buy and so forth. And so we've been trying to, how do we get our story across to all the different demographics? Because everyone, as you said, likes to create. They like to build, and crafters, regardless of their demographic, like to build and create. And so I'm just
Mm.
interested to kind of see what happens in that space and what
Yeah.
companies, kind of come up out of innovation to help more people see the value of the products out there, and then to help companies see the value in different demographics rather than their kind of golden cohort
Mm-hmm.
demographic.
Yeah, because that would just open up a whole world,
Yeah.
a whole new avenue of customers. That's interesting. Where can people get in touch with you? Where do you hang out at the most?
So you can go to my LinkedIn, Jonathan Shroyer, probably the first one you'll see, the only one. You can Google me if you want. I'll definitely be the first one there for the first few pages. Or Jonathan at Quimby. It's QUIMBI.ai. So Jonathan at Quimby.ai. Those are the best places to reach out to me. Love to talk with folks about AI, people empowerment, L&D, HR, all the different topics. And, I'm a kind of a student of business and a student of education. So just excited to talk with folks.
Yeah, and I'll make sure to put all that in the show notes for people who are listening. It will be in the show notes, so you can reach Jonathan there. Jonathan, thank you so much, and cheers to building and creating. And I'm excited where Quimby is going to be a year, 2 years down the line. You never know. I might be, am I going to be able to know? So, is it something like, am I going to be able to see like Quimby, or is it going to be embedded in the actual tool? I mean, like let's say game or whatever that company. It's like an embedded right in there.
It'll mostly be white labeled. There
Yeah.
may be some companies that choose to keep Quimby as it is, but it's mostly, we don't want it to stand out. We want it to be like their customer experience. We want it to be like seamless. And so
Seamless,
we
yeah.
wouldn't call our name out. But so much, thank you so
Gotcha.
much for the time, Elena. I really appreciate the
Yeah,
opportunity to tell my story.
absolutely. Thank you.